Okay, let's move to your next language. So I believe you're Spanish. How is your Spanish nowadays?
Mm, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but and it got a little bit better after I lived in Spanish-speaking countries for a little while.
Right. Yeah, my Spanish is also quite rusty nowadays, but I imagine your comprehension of Spanish is still pretty good, right? Like you can
Yeah,
read relatively well.
yeah.
Cool. So let's imagine you are listening to an audio in Spanish and you have the text. You can understand most things when you're reading. Maybe when you're listening, some things are a little too fast. How would you approach studying with worksheets in this context of a more intermediate student?
Okay. When it comes to Spanish or even Italian, I think it's easier for us because the root is the same. It all comes from Latin,
They are
and
Romance languages.
yeah. So I normally don't have to go through every single word, but at some point I'm just trying to understand the way they speak because even though it's very similar, it could almost directly translate it. They speak in a different way. For example, one of the things I notice is that sometimes they, like, instead of saying I do or something like that, subject and verb, they put the subject at the end. And then I noticed that when they do that is to emphasize the subject, and that
Hmm.
you can only notice when you're actually listening to a native speaker speaking. And I know Spanish is a little bit different depending on the country.
There we go.
But this is one of the things I remember I learned with the worksheet, and why they were doing that, because it sounded a little bit weird at first.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of this as kind of like developing your Spanish muscle in this
Hmm.
case.
Yeah.
Like you understand the language, it's similar enough to Portuguese. You lived some time in Spanish speaking countries, but there are a lot of things that you don't really understand why people say things in a certain way or how they say things in a specific context. And just from the repetition of listening and reading, thinking about it, analyzing, listening and reading, just the repetition of that process really makes you see connections and understand things in a way that I don't really know if I have a different method of studying that is as good at making these connections as just worksheets, text, and audio.
Yeah. Normally, I like to use that with something else. So obviously, for me, as I said, the worksheets are the perfect material. But if I want to go deeper, for example, like that, I would, I don't know, watch a maybe series or movies and try to notice that, you know? And that's how you start making correlations in your brain, starting to, what did you say about your Spanish muscle?
Um, Maybe kind of developing your
Yeah,
strengthening. I can't
yeah,
remember.
exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's very useful for people at all stages of language learning, but especially for people kind of in that intermediate stage of you can probably read and write pretty well, you can understand relatively well, but the next step is just putting it all together. Cool. So let's move to English. So, Felipe, you speak excellent English. I've talked to you in English for hours and hours, and you make like one mistake an hour in English.
No, no, right?
The point is, you're a very, very advanced speaker. Your English is fantastic. To be honest, I mean, I speak with thousands of Brazilians in English. You are in the top 1% for sure.
Thank you.
No problem. That's that's why you work for us. So, I imagine a lot of people are thinking, okay, if I could speak English the same way that Felipe does, he's completely fluent, he has no problems. Why would he need to study with worksheets? So, I guess two questions. is it beneficial for you to study with worksheets in a language where you are already very advanced? And if so, how is it beneficial?
Okay. First answer, absolutely. Because I think you've
That's
said
correct.
that a lot of times, but it's a never ending process. And let me give you an example. You said my English is good, but sometimes I cannot pronounce three perfectly. And that's like very basic. You learn that in the very beginning. And as I said, it's a never ending process. So when you start studying those things all over again, you realize that you thought you knew something, but actually you didn't. And on top of that, whenever I listen to you, I try to copy you. For example, sometimes you say so.
I've noticed.
Yeah. So now I probably say so more because of you, but like I'm just trying to copy you, and that's what I always do. I listen to a native speaker and I try to copy them. And even when I'm taking classes, German classes, I'm like, how would you say that? I know this is the right way to say it, but how would you say that? And I think that's how I went from advanced to like really people saying, oh, you speak like an American. Because I try to copy you. Even if you say it wrong, I'm going to say it wrong. But that's how I use it. Because sometimes you say a sound or you say something, I don't even know what it means. Let's say, no way, for example. If you try to translate it, it doesn't really work in Portuguese. But I understand the context and then I try to copy you. And with the worksheets, I know exactly why you're saying that, you know?
No way.
This is just maybe a bad example, but yeah, I try to copy you all the time when I speak English.
No, it's a wonderful example. I think that's so important. I'm very, very proud. Okay, two things here. The first point that you mentioned, that it gives you a really good opportunity to review, in some cases, to review some of the basics. I think this is super important. Like half of learning a new language or any skill is simply reviewing all the time to make it totally natural. So that is a huge benefit. Does not matter what your level is, what your experience is, reviewing is really, really important. And the second thing you mentioned about the ability to imitate, to mimic native speakers, like you're copying what I'm saying, even when I say things wrong, which is a lot of the time. That's like the master skill for me. If you can imitate native speakers and you can really kind of catch what people are saying and then say the same thing, you are golden. You're good to go. You don't need me anymore, right?
Yeah, and on top of that, I would add one more thing. So whenever I'm editing an episode or transcribing an episode, I normally notice what Alexia says because her English is excellent. And
What
sometimes I'm
Alexia
like,
says.
says, there you go. And sometimes I'm like, I know she said something wrong, and then you correct her. And sometimes I'm like, is it right? Or sometimes I'm like, no, this is definitely right. And then when I see the worksheet, it's actually not right. But maybe because of her Brazilian brain, she thought it was right. I thought it was right, but it was definitely not right. And that's really, really good for me. So I learned by her mistakes.
Yeah, totally. And I think this is kind of another case of what she is saying is probably correct, and the way you are understanding it is
Mm-hmm.
correct in quotations.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, maybe it's not the way I would personally say it most naturally.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Cool. That really helps me. So there you have it, guys. It doesn't matter if you're learning German, Italian, Spanish, English, Portuguese. Studying with worksheets is the bomb. It's really cool. And I think Felipe explains it really well. I think you explained it really well in the video, which people can find on our website.
It's in
Anything
Portuguese, by the way.
it is in Portuguese. com sotaque do interior de São Paulo. Anything else you'd like to add, Felipe?
No, I think that's it for today.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show when Alexia is dealing with construction at our apartment. And hopefully I will talk to you again on the show soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye.
Bye.